Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Jenny. This is my January reading wrap up, and please excuse me if I seem to ramble today. I am highly jet lagged from a very long travel day yesterday. So I hope that it makes sense when I'm talking to you about the first book I finished. So the first book I finished was a carryover from my December TBR, and it's called Time Was Soft There, A Paris Sojourn at Shakespeare & Co. by Jeremy Mercer. This is a memoir. Jeremy Mercer in the late 90s was a criminal reporter, journalist in Canada, and he got into some murky situation and quickly fled and went to Paris. And while he was there, he was enfolded into the Shakespeare & Company bookstore culture. So this book does chronicle the history of Shakespeare & Company and talks really extensively about George Whitman, who revitalized the store after the original version was shut down in World War II. So I wasn't really super familiar with the history of Shakespeare & Company. I just remember hearing here and there some rumors. So it was really informative to learn the history and where the current store that is there today and is still a very popular tourist attraction came from, and a lot about George Whitman and his life, and a lot about the many different types of people who were living in the bookstore at the time that Jeremy Mercer was there. So this is the late 90s, early 2000s. I wouldn't say that Jeremy Mercer himself is a very sympathetic, like he's not really a character that you like a lot. He's pretty messed up, and he is unapologetic about that in the story. And I think he was young and excuse me, he was young and confused when he came to Shakespeare & Co. and he learned a lot from George and from the other people who were living at the store and made friendships and romances. I think he credits his time there with making him the person he is today. And so you really get that sense of that. And also he does in his afterword talk about the differences between the store when he lived there and the store now, and it has changed, I think, a lot over the last 15 years and become something a bit more conventional and a bit less obscure and off the wall as it was when George Whitman was primarily running it. I actually was going to look up whether or not he's still alive, and I did not do that, but he was he was 90 years old as of the publishing of this book, and this book was published in 2005. So I think it's highly likely that George Whitman has passed away. I'm not super educated on him as a person and the span of his life, but I do know that before he passed away, his daughter was going to come in and kind of run the bookstore and keep it going in his family, which is what he was trying to do. So if you're interested in bookstores, if you're interested in I wouldn't say this is coming of age, because Jeremy Mercer was an adult when he was at this point in his life, but he was a young adult, and he was definitely a lost adult, someone who was trying to figure out his life, trying to figure out his place in the world. Then you would probably enjoy this. There's a lot of different characters. I think he said that he only changed the name of one person who didn't want to be featured as their real name. So these are real people that he was writing about. And it certainly has, that wonderful expression of Paris. And I would say it shows a side of Paris that is not all touristy and glory. It's actually a lot of grit, a lot of some underbelly, I would say, some like down and out in Paris kind of vibes come from this. So yeah, it's not really a glamorous view of Paris, but more of a living, dollar to dollar type of feel, which I enjoyed because I think it's good to get different experiences of a place and kind of see it from many different perspectives. So I enjoyed that. Wasn't a 5-star read for me. I gave it 4 stars, but I definitely think it's a good read, and yeah, I would recommend it. All right, I will check in again when I have finished another book. Good morning, everybody. I'm still trying to figure out the best places to film in my new house, but I wanted to wrap up Words on Fire by Jennifer A. Nielsen that I read with Elliot. So this is probably the last middle grade book that we will read together. This is set in Lithuania at the end of the 19th century, and it follows the story of Lithuanian patriots who are being persecuted by the Russians. At this point, Russia, of course, is still ruled by the Tsar, and the Cossack soldiers are terrorizing the Lithuanians because they're basically trying to commit cultural cleansing and take away their language, take away their customs, take away anything that makes Lithuania different from Russia. And we follow Audra, who is the daughter of book smugglers. So there was a whole group of people who risked their lives to smuggle books written in Lithuanian into Lithuania after these sanctions were put on. And they were also, of course, revolutionaries trying to fight for Lithuanian culture. So my children have Lithuanian heritage, and so we thought this would be an interesting book to explore a period in history, and also to learn more about Lithuania, which is quite a small country and not one that you hear a lot about. So overall, I think this was a really good story. It was very convenient. There was very happy endings. It had a tone that was very much, that middle grade kind of plot-driven tone, where everything's quite convenient and things work out probably better than they would in real life. So in that way, I had a bit of problem suspending disbelief while reading this. But I think that it was good to learn about, a part of the world where I'd never read about before. Jennifer A. Nielsen is not Lithuanian. I don't know if she has any Lithuanian ancestry, but she's American and writes, historical fiction and sounds like some fantasy and different things like that. So writes quite widely. I have nothing to compare this to know whether the research was done well, but it did feel that the uniqueness of the story meant that she would have had to have, done some, fairly extensive research to gather the extent of the atrocities that were committed by the Russian soldiers, and also the time period. It's a very specific time period. So so that is Words on Fire. I'll check in again when I have finished another book. Good morning, everyone. Please forgive me as I try to figure out the best places to put the camera in our new house. Things are not set up at all. Okay, so I finished The Future by Catherine Leroux, translated from the French by Susan Oristed, if that's not right. Ouriou. Susan Ouriou, I think is her name. Yesterday, and I listened to this on audio. This book won Canada Reads 2024, and it is a dystopian futuristic novel. So I tend to like these novels, and there was a lot to like about this one. But
overall, there were a few problems that I had with it that just didn't go away for the whole span of listening to the book. So we follow multiple characters in this narrative, and I find that when the transitions happen between the narratives, you don't really know. There's really long chapters, so there's only 4 chapters in the whole novel, and they're very, very long, and you're jumping from character to character throughout. I found that I'm not a person that doesn't like multiple narratives. I do, but I think there were too many characters in this novel. Our main kind of pivotal character is Gloria, who has come to this city, which is Detroit, but a French version of Detroit, and which is called now I can't even remember the name. I mean, this is part of the issue. At times there was so much in this novel that I struggled to hold on to names, and they of course were in French names. Not that should be a problem for me because I do speak French, but just, yeah. So she comes because her daughter has been murdered or is dead, and her granddaughters are missing. She comes to this town, but when we get here, when we open up, she's been here for a while. She's already established friendships with the other adults in this community, and she's made herself known. But we learn later on that when she came, a lot of the people in the town were like, oh wow, she's gonna change things, or things are gonna change now. There was this underlying fantastical, spiritual, magical realism to the story that I found didn't work. I didn't understand why that was brought in and how we were supposed to feel about it as the rest of the narrative unfolded. So there's that element. Gloria's character is great. A lot of the characters were really great. Eunice, there's these characters who've seen a lot. They've been through revolution. They've been through, I would say it sounds like an ecological disaster, but also a world where the haves and have-nots has become very divided, and all the people who have the money have kind of left the rest to survival of the fittest type of situation. Along with that, there's a group of children who live in a park, like basically feral children. They've raised themselves, they have their own hierarchy, they live separately from adults, they don't trust adults because all of them have probably had terrible things done to them by adults. They've all given each other very random names like Lego and Adidas and Fiji. And they have a very strict social order. Their social order is talked about a bit, but nothing in this novel is super explained to you. So you just have to kind of go with it and I was able to do that. I don't need a dystopian to tell me every single detail of what's happened or the new social order or why things are the way they are. But I do need it to settle down into the characters a little bit more than this one did. It just jumped too much. We were in a horse's mind. We were in a dog's mind. We were in multiple children's minds. There were too many characters. And I think that the writing itself was quite beautiful. There were a lot of lyrical, poetic statements. But again, it's not a poem, it's a novel. And so I struggled with this beautiful prose contrasted with these characters who I really liked, but who were too many to really attach to. And then you get the story of what is happening and, why did the little girls run away? What happened to their mother? What was their mother doing to them? All of that stuff. There's so much in it. And I feel like for me, there was just too much in it. it became like, just throw that in. Okay, now throw this issue in. Okay, now throw that issue in. And we're like tackling all these issues in a very, piecemeal way with all these threads coming out, but they don't have as much impact when they're so diluted for me. So in the end, these children and the adults form some sort of loose, connection. I feel like you were supposed to finish the novel with a sense of hope that the world keeps on turning and changing no matter how bad the circumstances, which is true. But again, I don't know if the way it was conveyed was the best for me. So while I appreciate the book on many levels, and I definitely enjoyed it on several levels, overall, as a reading experience, it was not a book for me. So that is The Future by Catherine Leroux. And I will check in again. I think I will probably at least have at least one more. Probably one more that I will finish this month. This month's reading has been very challenging. So I will check in again when I've finished that one. Hi all. Okay, so I am wrapping up my last book of January. It is certainly true that reading this month has been a challenge, but I finished Landscapes by Christine Lai, and this was one of my fresh reads, my fresh read for January 2025. This book was released in 2023, I believe. Let me double check that. 2023, I saw it first on Sean Breathes Books channel because Christine Lai was one of his mystery guests, and I was very intrigued by it after hearing her description. I think this book is going to be hard for me to talk about, but I'm going to do my best. So this book is set mostly in England at a fictional estate called Mornington Hall. Our main character is Penelope, and Penelope is the archivist of this estate. The book is a diary, so it is a fictional diary, mostly of Penelope's writing, contrasted with a third-person narrative of Julian, who was the original heir to Mornington Hall, but he subsequently passed the ownership over to his brother Aidan. And Aidan and Penelope are a couple, and they live in Mornington Hall. And during the progression of the novel, you know that Mornington Hall is going to be demolished in about, I think, 6 months, maybe 4 months from the start of the diary entries. This is set in a future dystopian world where climate change has drastically affected lives, and the division between the rich and the poor has grown immensely. So it's interesting to me to be having read this alongside The Future by Catherine Leroux, because they both have an interpretation of a future dystopia around climate change, but they both did it really, really differently. There is a lot of art referenced in here because Penelope, the character, is very into art, and she is into Turner, and she writes snippets of there's little snippets included in here of some of her art specific writing about pieces of art, and I thought that part was done really brilliantly. I really enjoyed the format of the book. I really enjoyed how she did the diary entries, and the way the story unfolds, I thought was overall quite satisfying. This book is about violence as well. There is an undercurrent of discomfort through most of it. You know something bad happened to Penelope. You know that Julian was part of that, but you don't know what it was. And you don't know the context until much later in the story. There are people who come to live at Mornington Hall because it's kind of set up like an artist residency type space. and you meet some of those characters, but there are not too many characters in this book. You can keep everyone, you can follow the threads quite well. There's not an overwhelm of information. And I would say that Julian and Penelope are your characters that anchor you through the whole story. Both Julian and Penelope struggle with their mental health, and you see that reflected in what's going on around them. So they both are fairly stable, and then they both enter into some mental instability based on reliving the past. I also really liked the reference at the title of Landscapes and how that references different parts of the book, what that's saying about writing as a vocation, as a healer, as a way of understanding the world. That's all wrapped up into the title of Landscapes, as is a lot of the art. And there's also an underlying theme here of violence against women's bodies. And so if you can connect women's bodies to the earth and violence against the earth, violence against women's bodies, this is not a new concept, but it is something in feminist theory that has been talked about a lot. So I would say this is quite a feminist book. There's a lot of these themes that are brought up. I think if you've read Women in the Picture by Catherine McCormack, or you are interested in reading a nonfiction book alongside this fiction book, I would pair those two quite well, actually, because Catherine McCormack goes into details that are included in this story. So I'm curious if Christine Lai had read that book, or if she had read some of Catherine McCormack's other work, or if this is just a theme that came to her and she didn't realize that it was being written about in a nonfiction way in Women in the Picture, because I think they're very closely tied and they work really well together as a combination. I gave this 4 stars. I wanted to give it 5. I was very close to 5 with it, but there was I wasn't a huge fan of the ending, and I think, yeah, it's a book that was going to stay with me. There's a lot of deep reflections on humanity in here, and being human, and healing, and violence, and so there's definitely things that will stay with me. I could actually see myself rereading this sometime in the future. But yeah, I didn't quite get to 5 because it didn't give me that feeling that I need from a 5. But the writing was very good. I loved all the art talk in it. I liked the format a lot. So there were a lot of things to love about this, and I will definitely check out future novels by Christine Lai. I think that she's a great writer. So that is Landscapes, a very successful first attempt for my Fresh Reads project. And that is it for the January reading wrap up. I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.